Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's webinar. As you know, and depending where you are on the planet, can be good morning or good afternoon. Today we have the luck to meet for 1 hour, and we are going to spend 1 hour discussing about the energy transition market. And of course, as you see in the conversation itself, you can access this slide just by asking them by email to me at guilhemjean@tobefirstconsulting.com. In the same way, you can subscribe to our LinkedIn page, and you will receive in your feed, LinkedIn feed, let's say the recap of this video, of this webinar. And in the same way, I put in the conversation itself directly also the invitation for the next webinar, which will be held on January 27th, same timing more or less, but it will be the occasion to talk about oil and gas and petrochem, knowing that that would be the good occasion to make a recap of what has been happening last year in 2021 or this year still, and also look at the perspective for the year 2022, what to expect from oil and gas and petrochem. So of course, the invitation are in the slide, but in the meantime, you find in the conversation of this webinar directly there, the invitation where you can already subscribe. Just a point of focus, today we're using a new tool for this webinar. That's why the presentation will look different. Anyway, you still have the possibility to ask all your questions directly in the feed and the discussion feed of this conversation, and we will address all these questions at the end of the webinar. Also, one point, you are many to attend our webinars, and we thank you for this. We have been presenting all year different topic, but starting 2022, our webinars, which were open to everybody, will be reserved to our users of Project Smart Explorer, which is a majority of the people today on this webinar, as I can see. And in 22, it would be reserved to our users on Project Smart Explorer, or at least to the companies where we are active users for our database, but we also invite to our discussion some, let's say, partners that we work with, especially on data, etc., etc. So if you want to carry on with our webinars and still receive the invitation, do not follow to interact with us, and do not miss the opportunity to subscribe to Project Smart Explorer. Today's agenda is quite simple. Just first an introduction about yourself for those who do not know us yet. And of course, we'll make just a small recap about the project database, Project Smart Explorer, the tool we developed, because all the data we're going to use today will be extracted from there. So it's quite important to know which data we're talking about. Then we'll have, let's say, a small energy transition versus petroleum, because it's quite a frequent question we are asked, and it's quite important to understand the difference, because many of you are coming from the oil and gas industry. Then we'll have a broad focus, or let's say a macro focus on energy transition pipeline, how much business you can expect, what is happening, etc., etc. And we will finish by a big part, which is really, let's say, the main part at stake today, where we will focus per application to what are the business trends, what are the map, etc., etc. So we can have a word about each of these application, and then we'll come to the conclusion to keep, let's say, the most important part of this year on energy transition. So welcome, buckle your seatbelt, and now let's have a chat about energy transition. Just a small introduction about ourselves. Many of you know us already, but for those who do not know, we are To Be First Consulting. We are a family company. Jean-Charles and I work together for several years, and we have this tool called Project Smart Explorer, where we developed ABB. Jean-Charles was an ABB guy. He was vice president of the group in charge of oil and gas. I am myself a former Siemens active member, and we have used our experience as a business developer in those companies to develop this project database where we trace all the projects of the energy industry, mainly oil and gas at the beginning, let's say, but no, of course, all the energy transition, and that's today's topic. Just a logic about the tool itself. It's a project database where we trace 1,000 projects. We start to follow them at pre-feed stage, and we follow them until the 6 months at 1 year EPC contract, just so we focus on the, let's say, the active business where the opportunities are still open. Just a reminder, for oil and gas and petrochem project, we consider it's a broad project if the capex investment is above 100 million US dollar investment. But for energy transition, projects are sometimes way smaller because they are pilot or demonstrator. So this threshold of 100 billions goes down to 10 millions if we estimate that the project is really strategic for our industry. That's the case, for example, in hydrogen, etc., etc. So now just a few words about, let's say, the scope of those projects we trace. I would say the core of our activity and historical activities, of course, to trace all the oil and gas and petrochem projects. But since 2 years, we have uploaded in our database all the energy transition projects. And by energy transition, here you see we consider different type of application. Here you have, let's say, the main categories. You have electrification, of course, carbon capture and storage, all the hydrogen and ammonia declination that you would be interested in, of course, the solar and windmill project, but also new, let's say, more exciting application like waste to recycling, waste to chemicals, sustainable aviation fuel, for example. What is water treatment, where we will have a specific focus on, but also what is power generation, waste to, etc., or gas power generation, for example, and also, of course, to finish the energy storage. So the idea with this tool, Project Smart Explorer, if you are working in oil and gas and petrochem, is to grow your business and, of course, have these energy transition capacities because it's quite an interesting market, as we are going to see. And of course, we use our data and our tool to help our customer make themselves enter this energy transition. Enough about ourselves, about the topic, and about this introduction. Now let's go to what really matters, I would say. As I was saying in the agenda, the first, I would say, part of this presentation will be to address the energy transition versus petroleum, really understand what we talk about and what would be, let's say, the main differences. And of course, the main differences, if we talk business, are in market capital expenditures. Here on this pipeline and the charts, we plotted year to year how much business and how much investment was made in the 3 categories. In red, you find all the petrochem activities. In blue, you find all the oil and gas. And in green, you see the project in energy. So it's quite, I mean, many things can be told from this graph. The first one is, of course, here you see in the middle the year 2021. Which is more or less ending in those days. It was quite a, let's say, a strong year for all the energy business, not only energy transition, but as you can see, the energy transition has been starting to exist since 2019, and it's now taking, let's say, a momentum to grow. And of course, the oil and gas is taking a little bit the same direction. And I would say the energy business as a whole is growing. Now, if we compare in size, you see that the energy transition project is still a little bit marginal compared to what the oil and gas and petrochem can build as investment, but still it's no more, let's say, a small part of piece we cannot see. It's now coming as a new market, as a unique market, which is growing on top, here in this chart below the oil and gas, but it's, as we see it, it's quite independent. And it's not really replacing the oil and gas. So here, this graph represents our historical data, but also our forecast for the coming years. You see that 2021 is higher than the previous year. You see that 2022 is super high already. It doesn't mean that all this business will materialize. It's a forecast. Some project here will be delayed, etc., for the coming years. What is also interesting that you see that the year 2022, 2023, etc. are already at a super high level, meaning that the pipeline for project, not only oil and gas, but also for energy, as you can see here at the bottom, are just growing and growing for the years to come. And also, just one thing before we move to the next slide, is that if you see the chart going down, it doesn't mean that, let's say, the energy business is going to disappear. It just reflects the market we see as of today of project announcements. So of course, the project on the year 2025, 2026, etc., do not exist yet. They are not announced. So of course, they are not part of the database. So this is why it's going down. But don't be worried. Of course, here the market will appear. It just takes okay on the next year. It will build up on top of it, etc., etc. So now, if we do not look what is forecast, but what has been awarded, so the difference between the previous slide is that we just kept the project where the EPC contract was awarded. And here you see a little bit the same on the historical part, because 2021 is here. You see a little bit the same phenomena where 2021 is coming above 2020 and at the same level of 2019, which means that we should end up the year a little bit higher than this. And you see what are the pipeline for the coming years, which is already super high, knowing that 2022, which is here, has not started yet, but you see how much business has already been awarded for this year. So during the next 12 months, we'll see business awarded on top of it. And of course, it will grow to overpass 2020 and overpass also 2021. And you see this effect of wave just going to already start to build up the pipeline of projects for the coming years. And it's quite, let's say, a trend we saw for since 2020, for those who have been following our webinars for a long time already. But that's something we see more and more. And today are kind of the effect, the whip effect we see from this supply chain, where we see a huge pipeline of projects coming up on the market, not only for oil and gas and petrochem, but as you can see, for energy transition as well, because you see this wave is already growing. And what has been awarded in 2022 is already higher than what has been awarded in 2021. So it's pretty big information just as it is. But of course, today, if we compare oil and gas to petrochem, energy transition is still small. It can be sometimes said as marginal, but when you see the curve is taking and the growth path is taking, we estimate that by the end of the decade, it will be a comparable size to oil and gas and to petrochem. And that's the main message here. Now, if we talk about petroleum and energy transition, when I see the news, when I hear people talking a lot about energy transition, is it really a transition? I'm not sure. To be honest, we see no opposition or replacement between project investment. We never saw really someone saying, okay, I was interested to make an oil and gas project, and now I'm going to make an hydrogen one, and I'm going to reuse my fundings to make that. What we see at the opposite is a big synergies between petroleum and energy transition initiative in a way that each other need to complete themselves. And that's a little bit the idea of this arrow in circular, where for example, the petrochem business would be the first to offtake the green hydrogen to clean its activities. So we see many green hydrogen projects linked to refineries activities. So here the petrochem is a driver for the energy transition. In the same way, for oil and gas, we see many gas developments, gas field developments, which are linked to carbon capture projects in order to decrease the carbon footprint. So here again, the oil and gas business is a driver for those energy transition projects. And in the same way, energy project, if you take the example of a solar panel or windmill, here, I mean, just by its component, you see that it requires a huge amount of oil and gas product just to produce the blade, just to produce the solar cells, etc., etc. So we see a demand driven a little bit, you know, it's like a cat or a dog trying to chase his tail, because we see all those projects motivating another one in the other category, etc., etc. So that's why we do not see it, let's say, more as a transition from one to another, but as a, let's say, synergy activity where we see project motivating each other, just in a way that the idea is to continue to produce a high level of energy, high level also of carbonate product, but just to do it in a cleaner way. And that's why we have this cycle. Also, just a point, I had it on a slide today, and I think it's really interesting as well. It was a quote from McKinsey company, the famous consulting company, which has published an article to say, why do we serve high emission company? Because this is where the emissions are. And I would say that it's a little bit the same for energy transition. Why do we see a lot of energy transition projects happening in oil and gas and in the petrochem activities. That's because where the emissions are, and that's where you can make the biggest difference in terms of carbon footprint and climate change. So we have to bear that in mind, that those projects, and that's a little bit the joke I put, petroleum versus energy transition, because as we see it, it's not an opposition. It's two worlds coming a little bit in parallel, which work together. Now, if we look at the numbers at the end of the year, energy transition projects are coming on top of all the petroleum projects. They do not replace, they just appear as a broad separated market and a broad new pool of investment in the energy sector. I would say, just to be picky, there is still differences. And of course, those energy transition projects, as they are starting, they are smaller projects most of the time, if we compare to the oil and gas and the petrochem industry. And those projects are executed faster, we see for some reasons. Now, we finish talking about the petroleum industry, and we really look at what energy transition project pipeline is. Just to start with a warning, because we are a little bit the victim of our, let's say, media system and all the news we see. And I put it under the title project to be or not to be, as a joke and a reference, because we see a lot of announcements being made for energy transition, with government announcing projects, with large companies investing money, or at least saying they invest money, with some companies which have nothing to do with the energy business announcing that they are going to enter this business, etc., etc., and a lot of announcements. And it's true that the energy transition is a political topic. It's in every election. It's a big discussion in our society. But we have to remember that we are business people, and we do not talk about politics. We talk about, let's say, real figures and business and investment. And there, I mean, from what we see in our database, what we trace, and the political announcement, we are clearly in a situation where there is a lot of announcement and a little bit less project, meaning the commitment is somewhere in between. And few reasons for this. First, because most of, well, not say most of the investment, but a large part of the investment, for example, into hydrogen, when it's said in hydrogen, just to take a specific example, will not be made to produce hydrogen, so as a project as we see it, but will be made, for example, to build up, let's say, the distribution network, the refueling station for hydrogen, or try to convert some pipeline or some activities to hydrogen, or make some research and R&D about hydrogen. So we see a large part of the announcements which are made in billions all the time, for example, for hydrogen, going not only on project, but going to this R&D and distribution network, which are not project and which will not bring any business to our industry. So that's, I would say, the first reason where we see, and sometimes people can be a little bit disappointed with the business they see on their daily life and do not see this green wave coming, because part of this wave, let's say, of investment is, let's say, going to another end where it's not, let's say, project related. Another one, another reason for this difference between what is announced and what is really project is that most of these projects are fueled by public financing, and that's the case in Europe, for example, or in US, where we saw all those economical stimulus being decided, being announced, where as soon as the president change or the majority change, etc., etc., all those projects and financing are dropped on the next election. So here it's a big trouble, because of course, if you get, let's say, financing for a project, you start to work on it, invest some resources, some time, etc., etc., and after 6 months, the political change make it that your project is dropped, everybody is losing money, and it's not a good sign. So that's also an effect we see on the market. Even sometimes stop even before the money is actually on the table and people have started to work with. So bear in mind that okay, some projects are announced, but these are still not running, and they will not run before a long time, because it was a political announcement, but not really, let's say, an executed decision. Also, what we see, and it's quite a bizarre situation, is that we have many projects, and especially in the windmill and solar let's say, application, where we see environmental ONGs fighting each other to do or not do the project. For example, as a French, I'll take an example in France of a solar farm which has been decided to be built in the south of France. And you have, let's say, on both sides of the project, people in favor and people against the project, people fighting and environmental organization fighting. One saying, okay, the solar is good for the environment, so we should do the project. And on the opposite, another association, a pool of associations saying, yes, of course, it's a good, but still, if we need to cut down trees and it's some quite big, let's say, surface to erase the forest, okay, it's not worth doing this project. So, and that's a little bit some kind of discussion you may have with windmill in UK, for example, about all the birds threat it would be to many species. So we see those projects being stuck in a fight of environmentalists on both sides. So again, even if it has gone beyond this, let's say, political game, we still see those projects going really slow or being postponed. Now, if we look at the profile of the energy transition operator, here I put you on the right, just a picture I took in ADIPEC from a BP booth, where they were announcing, like Shell, for example, that they were starting to, from IOCs, meaning International Oil Company, to become an international energy company. In the same way, we have seen Total renaming and reorganizing their company to Total Energies. And that's something we see more and more. Now, today, if we look at the numbers on the left, we make the split between the International Oil Company in blue, the Nationally Oil Company, and in green, in red, sorry, and in green, the Independent Company. And what we see from the figures of investment is that those IOCs represent only 7% of the market, while the independent represent about 49%, and the national represent 43%. So if a lot of communication efforts are made by those IOCs, by those major, some of them are starting to make this green, let's say, energy transition move. But if we look at the reality of the market, it's mostly in the end of the independent and the nationally owned company. Just about the geography, if we took the 300 projects we have in the database, here you have the split on the left per region, here on the left, sorry, per region of the project location. So you see Europe and Asia Pacific really dominate the project around the world. In the middle, we tell you where the feed are located. And it's quite interesting to see that the figure is more or less well divided between Europe and Asia, representing the same amount of projects. But in the feed, we have North America, of course, taking care of many of the opportunities, especially offshore or outside US. And you have on the right the execution where the EPC is done. And here you see Asia Pacific taking a large and really the lion's share of the execution of the project, as we may see it in other fields of the energy industry. So it's here you see the scope. Now, if we look at the pipeline, here we have per year the volume of investment year to year for energy transition. And again, you see that this market was going slow and started really to pick up at 2019, where all the decision, 2020, sorry, when all the decision about economical stimulus were taken, where we were starting to get out of the COVID, etc. And we saw this wave of energy transition project getting a lot of financing. And this is what you see here on this graph, this first wave, huge wave of investment, where we stand today, 2021 is about here. It represents about 30 billions in our forecast. And you see this figure going up, up, up. And again, if it goes down, it doesn't mean that there will be no more project or the energy transition will end. It just reflects the vision we have as of today from this project. So you see, it's growing fast. And it's quite an interesting market to enter because it's brand new opportunities. Now, if we look, no more forecast, but what has been awarded, let's say EPC-wise, you see that what has been awarded in 2020 is huge compared to 2019. And you see that 2021 is already higher than 2020, really high figures as well. And you see what has been awarded for the coming years, which is quite uncanny to have the year here, 2022, 2023, 2024, really high in terms of award. Why? Because this wave has to be, let's say, buffered by the engineering companies, by the contractors. And of course, as soon as they have filled their book orders for 2021, they started to refill their book orders for 2022, 2023, 2024, etc., etc. So we see, let's say, this boom being buffered a little bit by the capacities of the company to deliver those projects, but it means that here you see a pipeline of projects full for the coming years because there will be no way to buffer all those projects and all those investments. Now, if we look at where it has been awarded, here you have the map from Project Smart Explorer again, and here you see that those projects are located well in Europe, in Middle East, as well. Many of them are in Australia and in China, and of course, US is for many of those projects. So you see the balance for this project. It's quite organized as hub. I would say it would be 4 or 5 hubs. If you take US, Europe, Saudi Arabia and its neighbors, China and Australia, you have more or less 90% of the energy transition market. Of course, those people were quite active in the energy business already, and they are the first one to take, let's say, the lead on this energy transition topic. First, to support their oil and gas and petrochem activities, but also to take, let's say, technological advancement on all those applications as well. No, just to try to give an idea about this energy transition evolution, what we see today is really a wave of project, a tsunami of projects due to the post-COVID economical stimulus. Most of the projects we see as of today are, let's say, financed by public authorities or governments. Today, those projects, many of them are pilot and demonstrator, but what we also see and forecast is that we already have phase 1 and phase 2 plan of those pilot and demonstrator, meaning we are still at the phase of, let's say, developing the technology, but the idea is really to gear up in 2024, 2025, really to go to the full speed and on a larger scale project. Also, one takeaway is to say that the pipeline of project is already full. Okay, that's really something we can see for at least until 2026. And of course, in the next coming 4 years, we see many projects coming on top of it, which means that this energy transition will skyrocket, like the little drawing on the right, because we see huge pipe of investment, a lot of, let's say, synergy and dynamic around them. So those projects are really easy to be done. Now, if we look at more, let's say, in terms of size and what is this market, we can really see it's a developing market because the biggest density of projects are small size projects, below 100 million investment. But of course, we start to see appear some, let's say, a larger project just below 101 billion US dollar. But in the scope, we already have planned on the year 2025, 2026, 2027, 2028. Tens or to a dozen of giant projects which have investment between 1 billion and 20 billion, just as big programs with different phases, etc., etc. And we see the market shifting from resources, those small projects, to more and more large-scale projects and sometimes giant projects. Also, just a figure, the investment in 2 years has just been multiplied by 5, which I'm not sure it would be the case in the next 2 years. But at least we know it will at least double if we compare 2021 to 2023. So it means that this market is just going super fast. And of course, it represents a huge amount of opportunities for all the players of this market. Now, if we go to the detail itself, because it has a lot to be said about, I think your main focus would be hydrogen. It's a big focus for all the people, especially if you come from the oil and gas and the petrochem industry, because it's kind of the same, let's say, know-how, same expertise you need, but with the extra step. And here I put you 3 graphs, which I think are interested in. First, the forecast on the top left for how much business is already in the pipeline. You see the year are pretty strong already, and you see that we have a huge wave of projects which are starting. Of course, Okay, part of it of this forecast will be postponed to the coming years, etc., etc. But if you look at the graph below, it's no more forecast, but what has been awarded already. And you have the year here 2020, you have the year 2021 today, which has been already higher than 2020, which was already a big year. But you see what has been awarded for 2022, what has been awarded for 2023, 2024. And here you see we really gear up to a next level. And that's a little bit this syndrome of pilot demonstrator being executed as of today, let's say, which were projected in 1 year and a half, 2 years time frame, which we're trying to prove the technology. And when we look at the second wave of award in 2024, here we are more talking about the phase 1 development of those pilot and demonstrator, which are in a bigger scale, of course, but which are just waiting for, let's say, the technology to be proven. So, of course, the first projects are now coming to operation with some big successes. So, of course, the phase 1, phase 2 are already validated, and that's why we see numbers already going super high for 2024. And of course, or if here we were in the case of small project, 10 million, 25 million, 50 million, sometimes here we are more in the scale of project into billions. So even if it's that few projects, they are just, let's say, a little bit the annunciation and the initiation of this second wave of project we'll see for hydrogen. If we look on the right, what is quite interesting is to see, let's say, the difference of operator we see in this industry. Independently lead the game. Many of them can be startup, can be, let's say, shift or spin-off from universities. It can be chemical people going to the hydrogen business. It can be gas distributor going into the hydrogen business. So really many new players going into this industry to develop, let's say, new license model, new technologies, etc., etc. And of course, a repercussion of this is that the EPC contractor is just the pre-selection made at the FEED stage, meaning the guy doing the FEED will also do the EPC, and it's agreed from upfront at the selection of the vendor. Those projects are really going fast track because they are mostly driven by governmental subsidies. It's really easy in Europe, in US, but also in Australia, for example, or in Middle East, to get public financing and some private financing to execute those projects, even if we don't know where the demand is, even if we don't know, let's say, the economical viability of those projects. Okay, everybody wants to be on board hydrogen, everybody wants to try, so this is where we stand today, and those projects are just flying, okay? The idea is not about the price of the project, it's about producing and proving the technology. Here you see the map for hydrogen. I think, yeah, I don't have to comment it for many minutes, but Europe is, of course, the biggest hub for hydrogen. That's where we see really the concentration of pilot and demonstrator project done today and active as of today. And elsewhere around the world, mostly US, Australia, Middle East, and China, we see those second wave projects bigger, which are just waiting for the technology to be proven in Europe to replicate at a larger scale back in their own countries to serve their own industries. We're going to the carbon capture case. I would say it's a different scale of investment, but it's more or less the same strategy. The carbon capture and storage project have been, let's say, serving the same purpose with a lot of investment from the economical stimulus. So that's why we see a huge wave coming in those years. Here, I would say the reasoning is a little bit the same. We see it growing with a huge prospect, with huge also forecast. But if we look at what has been awarded, we're a little bit in the same dynamic, where you see here, for example, the year 2021 being pretty okay, already the double of 2020 and maybe 10 times what has been 2019 or 28. And you see that 2022 is already being super high, 2023 is the same way, etc., etc. So here we are just feeling, let's say, the book orders of the engineering able to develop those projects because the demand is really strong. Looking at the people who are demanding for those projects, it's well dominated by the national oil company, which represent about 65% of the project financing. Because for many countries, they want to be able to have, let's say, a clean carbon footprint as a country itself, and they use their oil and gas companies which are the largest emitters in those countries to reduce their carbon footprint, of course. And many independent are also trying to develop the technology there. Because, of course, they assume that in 5 years' time, with a carbon tax or some, let's say, legal and taxation system, there will be a business about carbon credits. So they want to be able to enter this business as well. What is really interesting as well is to see that EPC contracts are just, let's say, the pursuit and the continuation of the FEED contract. So here again, if you are not placed at the FEED, you will have no chance to enter at the EPC stage. And if we are looking at the also on the other side, the technology used today for all those projects belongs to the IOCs, so they are not really out of this market. Most of the time, they are, let's say, shareholders, if not operators, at least shareholders in those projects made by the national oil company, because the IOCs and those majors are the ones with the technology to capture the carbon, to transport it, but also to store it on the ground. Because it's a bit specific. So even if they are not, let's say, the main players of this market, they can be really good door openers and they are well involved into those projects. Again, I put you here the map for those projects. You see that it's quite active around the North Sea for the simple reason that the North Sea want to become a little bit the storage location for all the CO2 produced in Europe. So it's quite interesting to see what is happening there. It's really active as of today, especially in Norway and in UK. No elsewhere around the world. What we see as really active is US and Australia because they really want to reduce their carbon footprint. And of course, if you look at those spots of the green dot, like here, for example, you are around Houston. So it's really the oil and gas companies trying to reuse their depleted oil and gas field and their refineries to reduce their carbon footprint. So quite interesting project for all the players of the oil and gas because it's more or less the same process and you need a lot of equipment to do it. And of course, equipment is key to manage those gas because the complexity of those guys is not really there. The complexity is more on avoiding any leak of the material we transport. Now, if we look at the bigger package, we were talking about it at the beginning, the solar and the windmill associated to all the energy storage, because as we see it today, it's really hard to develop a solar or windmill farm, for example, without energy storage. It's true that those first projects, they were done, let's say, and linked directly to the grid itself, just to supply to the grid. But today, if you really want to monetize the electricity produced by solar and windmill farm, you need to have this energy storage in order to release the electricity at the timing where the electricity is the most expensive to sell on the market. And those energy storage bricks are quite cheap to do, but they can really boost, let's say, the revenue of a project. So that's why we associate them together, because today we do not see those projects done without energy storage capacities. Also, the forecast is going quite strong, and you see it has been starting a little bit earlier as energy transition, but it's going quite strong. To be honest, 2019 was already a pretty big year, and you see this wave of investment going on. Many projects are getting postponed, especially in the windmill in UK, in US, a lot of fight. Legal fight between associations, between authorities, between local communities, etc., etc. But still, those projects are done and executed, many of them. And when you see what has been awarded, you have the year here 2020, 2021, 2022, with the year 2023 and 2024 being quite strong already. So you see that we see at least those projects continuing to happen and to be awarded. So it's quite strong investment. And here the big players are only independent, mostly, then followed by the national oil company. For example, if we take Equinor as a national oil company, we see that they are quite active in this business. And really, we see people like Iberdrola, SSE, etc., etc. So few names representing most of the market and being really, let's say, the leaders of it. And their business model is quite clear. As soon as they are awarded a FEED, they award in the same way as the EPC, just a conversion at the final investment decision, but they are not going to make a review, etc. What is specific to this market is that it has little engineering capacities. The complexity there is quite different than what we see elsewhere, for example, in the oil and gas, but also in the carbon capture or the hydrogen. The idea is more to replicate a technology brick and then to replicate it as much as we can to have, let's say, scale reduction of the price of production. The idea and the challenge here is not really on the engineering side, but more on the construction and the operation of the equipment. So of course here again, the equipment that is going to be used is quite important, and the quality requirements are really high. Here you have the implementation of those projects. It's a little bit more balanced than carbon capture and hydrogen. It's quite interesting to see where those projects are located. In Europe, we start to see them. Okay, they suffer a lot from all the discussion around the feasibility of those projects. US is starting as well. We see the first wave of projects actually going to execution, actually being done, even if they've been talking a lot about it. The North Sea is really active. Africa is looking for some projects. There are some big opportunities as tests to develop those projects there. And of course, Saudi Arabia, but all the Middle East region is quite active, especially if we think about solar projects there. They are really profitable and they are done really at cheap price. That's really where we see those best projects, but also, of course, the center of Asia as well, where we see many projects being done and being quite well executed in 18 months, 2 years time. So it's quite stunning. And Australia, again, is trying to position themselves as an energy provider for the whole world. So, of course, they want to make this turn on windmill and solar as well, because they are full of wind and full of solar, as you know. Just going to different application. If we look at the power generation, also all the application which are waste to energy, waste to recycling, waste to chemical, waste to hydrogen, for example, and also what are the electrification. Some of those projects are different applications, but are often linked together. For example, power generation to electrification, because it's a big topic to reduce the carbon footprint, but as well waste to chemical. For example, we see many of those applications done in all the refineries of Europe and in US as well, where we see, let's say, a revamp of refineries in order to accept some used plastic in order to recycle those plastic, but also to produce, for example, sustainable aviation fuel, which is much more needed by the aviation industry to reduce their carbon footprint. So you see this graph, the wave is, I would say, more peaked, more concentrated. That's why you have less years. But and those projects have a time frame which is shorter. That's why you don't have as many bars at the other application. But in the same way, we really see today a big increase by the scale of 2 to 3 year to year in terms of investment. And what is really interesting is to see what has been awarded. If you have here the year 2020, you have here the year 2021, and you see that 2022 is already really a scale above 2021. 2023 is in the same way a scale above. And those projects, if they have been awarded EPC in 2022, 2023, it means that those projects have started to be worked on 2020. So here again, there are really, let's say, the effect of all the decisions starting to be made in this post-COVID stimulus momentum, where we were trying to find new solution, and all those ways to recycling application. That's something we are not seeing many years ago, but today we see on, let's say, a weekly basis, new project coming up. Because those projects have really negative carbon footprint. Yeah, they have negative carbon footprint, sorry. So of course, they are really well financed by all the companies and private investors around the world, because they have a clear impact on carbon data sheet for companies and the pledge you have made to become carbon neutral. Here are the players. If you look on the right, mostly independent and national company. The energy transition is really in their hand, but of course that's the case also for all those applications. What is really interesting is that those projects are growing in size. They started really small, even sometimes below 10 million US dollar. But today we have seen a first shot of those projects in small size, but today we see and we experience people thinking to make those projects into billions of dollars. Okay, can scale up to those investments. But of course, if those investments are so huge, because the impact on carbon footprint is huge, because you can just tear off carbon footprint for your entire plant, and you can reduce with huge amounts. And by having, let's say, the same process that you have been used to in the oil and gas or in the energy industry as a whole. So quite interesting application as well. Here you see where they are located. Two hubs, I would say Europe again on developing all those new applications, but also Middle East, which is quite active, and I'll put Egypt into Middle East as well, where we see those projects where people really want to change the way, or they want to equip themselves with utilities for their population, but they don't want to do it in let's say carbon emission way, but doing into by recycling, by waste to energy, for example, etc., etc. So it's quite interesting to see those new applications, which have a bright future, I think. And last but not least, application, water treatment. I put it aside, not because that's a bad case, but I think it's really an important one. Because water treatment and water treatment desalination, it's something we have not been following for so many years. And that's why you see that we don't have in our forecast so many experience there. But it has been a business for some years already, which is now growing since 2-3 years. For some reason, the first one, that the population in many countries, especially in Middle East, are growing substantively, and of course they need more water to be consumed. So we need more water treatment. And of course, it's part also as, let's say, the development of life quality to have a better quality of the water, because the water is responsible for many sickness. So those investments are quite useful for the population. The second thing we see is that as soon as you want to produce green hydrogen, people often talk about the green electricity that is needed to supply the plant, but most people tend to forget about the pure water you need to supply to the electrolyzer in order to produce this hydrogen. And many projects we see being done with hydrogen, we are missing this, let's say, water treatment brick as a supplier. And of course, as those projects of our hydrogen are starting last year or this year, now they're thinking, say, okay, now we're going to need this water supply. And of course, they are launching a water treatment unit. And that's where we see many projects. And that's why you see here at the bottom as awarded, what we see is this scale up, which is just trying to catch up with all the hydrogen investment which has been done into especially the green hydrogen. So of course, it's quite an interesting market. Some people have been in it for years, but for many application or equipment of the oil and gas, you can reuse your expertise to go in this business, which is also growing at quite a larger scale. Here, of course, the investments are well dominated at 94% by the national oil company, because they are the one with the responsibility to feed their country. And of course, they are the one financing those projects, because they don't make much money, but they are quite vital for any population. Also, what is really interesting, that those projects are done by, it's no conversion from FEED to EPC contract. Okay, it's one single contract where the contractor has to make everything. So it means that if you are not really early phase at the bidding period, at the pre-FEED, if you do not enter those projects, it means that you're out, and at least you need to know your players, and that's where Project Smart Explorer can help you as well. It's also a market which is quite well concentrated in terms of engineering. So by having 10 names, I mean, you cover more or less all the market. So if you want to enter this market, okay, it's still less door to knock, but it will be a growing market, and you see those perspectives. I mean, it's quite a growing one as well. From, I mean, if we compare 2019, which was the first year of the wave, to 2023, I mean, it will be times 7, times 8 what was the market. So it's a good opportunity as well to go on this. Here are the location. As you can see, it's really well concentrated in Middle East. Most of the opportunities are about water desalination. That's also where they need to build those capacities for the green hydrogen project. because they have launched those green hydrogen projects, but they realized they didn't have enough supply of water. While in Europe, we are going to use mostly water or from, as US, water from lake, water from rivers, which is less, let's say, intensive to clean and to pure. So that's where we see less project there, but it's coming. They are not still at the pre-FEED stage, but they are starting to boil, if I can make the joke, to go, because of course, if you want to produce tons and tons of hydrogen, it means that you will need to clean tons and tons of water. And of course, you cannot take all of this water from rivers located nearby. So projects are growing, and it will be, I think, one of the stream of this energy transition business later on. Now we are coming to a conclusion, and I see my watch. I'm still on the timing, so it's a pretty good time. And so I would say after a pivotal year of 2020, where we see also economical stimulus going on the market, 2021 has really been the confirmation that it was not, let's say, only a political announcement, but it was also actual business, not as the same height as the political announcement, but at least it was a real business, with a huge growth on the year 2021, and in a growth which will at least continue for some years, and not only keep up, but even accelerate in some cases. What is also interesting, and that was a question we could not answer at the beginning of the year, but we can answer now, is that those energy transition projects do not replace the petroleum project. I think they drive each other, and they grow together. And of course, the energy transition is a growing market, so it's scaling up to let's say, catch up with its petroleum cousin. Hydrogen and carbon capture, I mean, just if we take those two fields of application, most of them are motivated by petroleum need or application linked to petroleum plant or etc., but they are paid by public authorities. So it's quite interesting to see this kind of framework for project, but still those projects are happening, and we see them done in a good way. What we saw also is that this large wave started in 2020 will last at least for the next 5 years. And we estimate that the quarter of all the engineering of this market will be full for the next 5 years, because the investment are there, the need are there, and everybody wants to do those projects. The question is not really on the price of those projects, because they do not make any money for most of them, but the idea is more to prove the technology and to, let's say, have a communication effect to say, okay, I'm reducing my carbon footprint by this much. Now, if we look at in terms of business, what is interesting that to see that the operators are different, where the major are still active in the oil and gas, and we're representing most of the oil and gas a few years ago. Today, it's more challenge with the NOCs and independent. Today's energy transition is really made by independent new players and national oil company. So it's quite interesting. And of course, in terms of business, all the large majority, if not the vast majority of the field contract are converted into EPC contract, not without bid, but without bid in this time. And of course, here the idea and the lesson behind is to say, okay, those projects, you cannot expect to go at the EPC stage to sell your equipment, to sell your solution, etc., etc. You really have to be involved since the FEED stage, because those projects has to be delivered, and no decision regarding the process would be made at the EPC stage. In the same way, those projects, we assume they're all fast track, because the idea is not really to, let's say, decrease the price, have the best bidders, etc., etc. Really, the first aim of those projects is to start production, make knowledge about it, have some experience, have some product. So really, the goal is to produce as early as possible, so the price comes second to this. So the idea is, okay, I hope it was interesting for you. You can start to put your question directly in the chat. I'm going to ask and answer them in a minute. But I tried to give you an overview about the year 2021, how much you could expect from the energy transition. I hope it was interesting. And of course, if you want to jump and yourself or your company want to participate in this energy transition, of course, we can help you through our tool and our expertise to help you, to guide you in this energy transition. In the meantime, it's the opportunity at the end of this year to wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year for this end. And if you want to carry on to access our webinars and to participate in the energy transition, I suggest you ask your boss or your board to drop a little Project Smart Expert right below the Christmas tree. I think it fits perfectly there. And of course, we'll be able to start 2022 on the best way and to help you go on those projects in the meantime. So if you have a question, before I start to address them on the 5 remaining minutes, but if we need more time, we of course take more time from that. Just a recap, follow our LinkedIn to receive the video and the replay of this webinar. You can send me an email at guilhem@tobefirstconsulting.com to receive the slide from this presentation. And of course, we'll have the next webinar on January 27th at 2 p.m. So same timing, 2 p.m. Central Europe time. And this time we'll address all the oil and gas and petrochem market to make a recap of what was 2021, but also to start to talk about the perspective of 2022. So thank you very much. I'm going to